This is Margaret and I'm from Sewing Machine Warehouse in Australia, and today I'm going to show you how to make a t-shirt on the overlocker in 5 easy steps. Now obviously the first thing you need to do, which is not part of the 5 steps, is to cut it out. Okay, now one thing I want to mention, when you're cutting a t-shirt, always bring the raw edge to the middle here and cut your front and back on the fold, and then open that out and cut your sleeve out. So you need about 1.2 meters of fabric. Now another thing is when you're pinning patterns on your stretch fabric, use glass head ballpoint pins and you'll find that the pins go in easier. Now once you've cut your t-shirt out, we need to go to the overlocker, and the first thing we need to do is the shoulder seams, and I will just pin those two together now, and then we'll move over to the overlocker. So open out your t-shirt. Now you're going to sew from the back side of your t-shirt, and this is a very important step. What you'll need to prevent stretch on the shoulders is some seam tape. Now you can buy yourself cotton tape, or you can use some nice satin ribbon. This is a seam binding tape, and it just happens to match my t-shirt perfectly. So once we pin those shoulders, place a bit of seam tape at the back like so. Oops. And then we'll overlock that in without trimming. So we don't actually trim the ribbon, so you might have to just pin it slightly off the edge. Okay, I'll do the other one and then we'll move to the overlocker. Okay, now we're at the overlocker. Now set your overlocker up for a 4-thread with a safety stitch, and that's stitch number, we show you here, it's stitch number 3. Okay, so it's set on A for the tension, and this one has a safety stitch which runs down the middle of the overlocking. So that's set on A, and about a 2.5 millimeter stitch length. And the other thing you need to do is put your foot pressure down to 2 instead of 3. Because it's stretch fabric, we don't want to add any more stretch by too much pressure. Alright, now remove the first pin. So this is actually step 1. And overlock that shoulder seam with the tape in, but remember not to cut the tape. And remember, we are doing it from the back of the t-shirt. Now this is another time-saving tip. Don't actually run off. Have your other shoulder seam ready to go into the front of the overlocker, and keep overlocking. And that way you just need to trim that chain between the two shoulders, and you've done it. Okay, so that's what it looks like, and that just prevents stretch on the cross grain of your fabric, and so when you've put your sleeve in, it doesn't drag the shoulder down. Alright, now I'm going to pin the sleeve in, and I'll start again when the sleeve's ready to go under the overlocker. So that's the second step. Okay, now for the next step, we're going to pin the sleeves in, and for that we just match up our notches. Just put my glasses on. Okay, so you've put a notch at the top of the sleeve, match that up to your shoulder seam. You've also got the front and back notches, so a double notch for the back, pin those, single notch for the front, pin that one, then your side seam, at the front and your side seam at the back. And have a look, and if you feel you need to put a couple of extra pins, do so. But always make sure your pins are easy to pull out at the overlocker. But these extra pins aren't necessary, it's just for my benefit. And stretch wear is really good because you can actually ease out the fullness by stretching it. Okay, now to the overlocker. Okay. And take that first pin out. And straighten your work up, making sure that there's no pinches underneath. There you go. You now have a sleeve in. Now for our next step we're going to do the side seams. Okay, now for step 3, pin the side seams. Now one thing you need to do is work from the back of your garment, and for the first pin, this is just a tip, always distribute the bulk by placing one seam allowance up and another seam allowance down, and matching that side seam there, that shoulder seam, sorry. Okay, so when your overlock is going over that, it doesn't struggle. And place your pins in the direction you're going to sew from. So I'm going to start down the bottom. Now remember, all seams in stretch fabric go to the front. So you press them to the front, unlike normal sewing where you press them to the back. This is a little different. Okay. Now to the overlocker. So, oh, and there's my box over there. Okay. Now remember to always trim just a little bit because your scissors don't quite cut the seam nice and neat, but the overlocker does. Now when you get to this seam here, I've got the pin right in the middle that way. So just make sure your underneath seam allowance is facing the right direction. And you see your overlocker goes over that nicely. Okay, now I did one earlier, so there's basically my t-shirt. Now for the next step, I'm going to put the binding on the neck edge, so I'll do that one. Okay, now we're up to step 4, and step 4 is the neck banding. So what you need to do is always, when you're cutting your pattern, mark the center of the neck, both back and front. Okay, now what you do here is you fold your t-shirt in half using those centers, so matching up your shoulder seam and the center of the back. So that's your neckline, and just probably put your sleeves through together and just pin those shoulder seams together so they don't move. And taking a tape measure, lay it flat out on the on your workbench. Taking your tape measure, measure your front neckline and stand your tape measure up. So you're measuring like this. Oh, let me get the centimeters correct, sorry. So on your sewing line, now that measures, what would you say, 19? Okay. And then from the shoulder seam, so measuring from from 19 all the way to your center back is approximately 40 centimeters. Okay, so 40, so that's only half. 40 plus 40 is 80. So write that measurement down. Okay, so we had 2 times 40 equals 80. Now, to work out the neck banding measurement, we divide 80 by 4, which equals 20. So we need to take away 20 centimeters from that measurement, leaving us with 60, plus 2 centimeters for seam allowance. So that's what we cut our neck banding at. Okay, so I've cut my banding across the grain, across the stretch, and I've cut it 4 centimeters wide because I don't want it very wide. I'm measuring out 62 centimeters. Okay, now this formula is only when you're making your banding from the same fabric as your shirt, so it's called self-banding. Okay, now The other thing you need to do is going on from marking your centers is you need to mark one more place on your neckline. So having those two centers together, so the front and the back center, just notch where that folds, and that becomes your quarter marking. So you have so you have 1, 2, 3, 4, and this is how we'll attach our banding. Okay, so now I need to take that to the machine and stitch those two together and fold it in half, and our banding is ready to apply. So I'll do that and I'll be with you in a minute. Okay, now you're going to put 4 pins into the banding, and these go in the 4 quarters of your banding. Let me just put my glasses on. Hang on a second. Oh, that's better. Okay, so establish where halfway point is. Right, it's the opposite side to your seam, and place a pin at right angles to that edge, and then bring those 2 pins together, and that's where our 3rd pin will go. And then bring those 2 pins, bring the center of this one. So we've marked all 4 quarters. This is very important to make it a nice even fit on our neckline. Okay, so if you quarter your neck, we've quartered our neckline and we've quartered our banding, so now we need to match those quarters up. Now starting from the back, starting from the back of our t-shirt, we pin, where's our seam? So good, don't even know where it is. There it is. Pin that quarter matching up with that quarter, and put your first pin in. Then the next quarter is on your almost shoulder seam, but not quite. And then the middle of your front will be your 3rd quarter marking. And then the shoulder on the opposite side is your 4th quarter marking. And so that's now evenly pinned out, and whoops, I've twisted that. Let me just turn that back around. Okay, so now I will take that to the overlocker and I'll sew that. Okay, now if you find putting your banding on is a bit daunting on the overlocker, this is my tip, because I find it's too fiddly. I actually stitch it on with a small zigzag at the sewing machine first. So set your zigzag up for about a 2mm length and a 1.5mm width. And sewing with your ribbing or banding at the top, just stitch it on with your machine. That way you get rid of all the pins. and you haven't got to worry about it moving all the time. So now we'll go to the overlocker. Now this is where you might want to raise the foot. So lift your needles up to the highest position and just grab the chain and pull it back. Like that, just undoing that chain. Okay. And bring your t-shirt underneath the foot and try to start somewhere at the back, but not necessarily on the seam. Okay, and then off you go. And always work with the small part, meaning you're banding up. Now when you go around and you're coming back to where you started, just keep it lined up. Remember to cut this bit off and stay in line with where you started. Okay, now when you've overlapped it sufficiently, turn the hand wheel up and just pull those threads at the front. Take your garment out from under your foot and make a chain off. Then take your loop turner, insert that through the back of your stitching. Grab your tail and pull that back through and snip off the end. And there you have attached your banding to your t-shirt. Now we'll give it a press, okay, and then we'll do the hems with the cover stitch. So I'll set my overlocker up for cover hemming and we'll do that next. Now we're ready to do the cover stitch. I might start on the sleeve because that's the hardest, and what I've done is pinned it up. I pinned it up 2.5 centimeters or 1 inch, okay, and I've transferred the pins to the right side, but I actually have my garment inside out. So because we don't have a free arm, it's not necessary. What you do is you place your garment sleeve underneath the foot and just establish where you want to stitch. Now remember, my hem is 2.5 centimeters, so I might line it up with my 1.5 centimeter marking on my needle plate. So I'm just going to line it up there. Okay, now starting at the back of my seam, working forwards, probably bring it a little closer to the seam actually, not that far but a little closer. There we go. Alright, off we go. Now remove the pins as you get to them. Now remember not to stretch your garment. Oops.
as you get to the point of where you started, just stop and trim those threads. Now remember, they won't unravel from that side, so don't panic about that. And stay in direct line of where you started. And just overlap that for about 1.5 centimeters. Stop with the needles up and then turn your hand wheel back for 1 revolution, and that will release the stitch from underneath. Then raise the foot and just gently take that out from underneath the foot and pinch where you finished off and pull gently to the side and trim those threads. And that is our join. Okay, now I'm going to bring these threads to the back, but turn it over, and this is what I will do. I will insert my loop turner. Oops, I forgot to show you one thing. Actually, let me just do that. Just draw that last stitch and release the loop, and insert your tweezers through there. Take the tail end of your thread, pull it through the loop and lock it off. And just pull that gently and you'll know that that's secure. Now take your loop turner through the back of your stitching, grab that tail and bring that through, and you can trim that off and that will not undo. Okay, and that's what your sleeve hem looks like. So that's how you finish off your 5th step, and then you actually have a finished t-shirt. There you go. I hope you find that easy to do, and have a go yourself.